Overheard my wife admit she only married me for my father's inheritance. Her words? He's too stupid to notice anyway. 10 years later, I bought the mansion she was evicted from. A few years back, I overheard my wife telling a friend she only married me to get my father's inheritance, calling me too stupid to notice. I didn't confront her right away. I played the long game. 10 years after she tried to manipulate me out of everything, I bought the house she was evicted from, and she still doesn't know I was the one who did it. We were sitting on the back patio, sipping tea while cicadas hummed in the oak trees around us. I remember the sky was gray, one of those heavy savanna afternoons when you know a storm's brewing even before the rain starts. Alina was talking to her friend on the phone, thinking I'd gone back inside. I only stepped back to grab my sunglasses, but I paused at the screen door when I heard her laugh. "Oh, I'm not in this for Caleb. Please. I married him for his dad's money. The man's practically a gold mine, and Caleb's too stupid to even realize what's in front of him." There was a silence on the other end of her call, then another laugh from her. "No, he still doesn't know. He thinks I actually love him." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even finish stepping out the door. It was like the bottom dropped out of my chest, and I stood there, stunned stupid, watching her swirl her wine glass like she hadn't just shattered my entire sense of reality. We'd been married nearly 5 years at that point. We met through work. My family's real estate company was handling the sale of an old heritage property in Charleston, and her firm had been brought in for some legal help. She was a paralegal, smart, gorgeous, confident in a way that filled up a room before she even said anything. I'd always been the quiet type. Grew up learning not to talk more than necessary. My dad, Franklin, was a real estate investor who made a name for himself buying up rundown properties across the Southeast and turning them into small treasures. He wasn't loud about his wealth, but people knew. When I met Alina, I thought I'd gotten lucky. She made me feel like the center of the world. She asked about my childhood, how I liked my job, what it was like growing up with a dad like Franklin. I thought she was genuinely interested in me. We got married in a small ceremony by the coast. She insisted on intimate and humble, and I fell harder for her because of it. I thought she wasn't in it for the money, and that meant everything to me. My dad didn't say much about her. He wasn't the meddling type, but I could feel the tension under the surface. He said, quietly one night after dinner, "Just make sure you always keep your eyes open. Not everyone is what they appear." That was the closest he ever got to telling me he didn't trust her. I ignored it. Thought maybe he was just being overprotective. After the wedding, we settled into a life that seemed perfect from the outside. Alina wanted to host dinner parties, get involved in the right social groups, and encourage me to take on more leadership roles at the company. She said she believed in me, said I was wasting my potential. At the time, I thought she was helping me grow. In reality, she was pushing me toward the decisions that would give her more access to what she thought was coming. When my dad got sick, she practically moved into his hospital room. I chalked it up to her being kind. But I noticed how often she asked about his estate, what the will looked like, who was in charge of it. When he passed, I was wrecked. And in the middle of my grief, she started asking pointed questions. "Did he leave the Savannah house to you? Are you the sole trustee? Do you know the passwords to his offshore accounts?" I thought she was just trying to help. The reading of the will changed everything. Dad left a fair portion to me. Yes, but nothing like what she'd been expecting. Most of it went to charities he'd supported for decades. He left me a large annual dividend and ownership of one property he cherished, a historic mansion on Skidaway Island that he'd spent years restoring. It wasn't worth as much in cash, but the legacy and sentimental value were priceless. Alina was livid. She tried to hide it, but I could see it in the way her eyes narrowed and how she stopped talking on the drive home. That night, she suggested selling the Skidaway estate. "It's old and expensive to maintain," she said. "We could use the money elsewhere." I said no. That's when things started changing. She pulled away from me. Gradually, subtly. Less affection. More girls' weekends. More lock screens on her phone. I ignored it at first, like I had ignored the warnings before. But after that afternoon on the patio, the moment I heard those words, I stopped being blind. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell her I'd overheard everything. I needed time to think, to plan. I contacted a trusted friend, Ron, who worked as a private investigator. I gave him everything. Her travel receipts, our shared account statements, her email login she once saved on my laptop by mistake. Ron didn't take long to uncover the truth. She'd been seeing someone else, Tobias Shaw, a name that meant nothing to me at first but would come to symbolize the second half of her betrayal. He was a flashy, smooth-talking socialite in Charleston who ran a string of failing real estate investment firms. They'd met during one of her weekends away. She had transferred nearly $60,000 out of our joint account to a second one under a family member's name. Worse yet, she'd started contacting estate attorneys, trying to find loopholes in my father's trust. She wanted to petition for a sale of the Skidaway estate under marital property laws, which would have allowed her to take half of whatever it sold for. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I played the role of the fool. I acted like the same old Caleb. I said nothing as she filed for divorce 6 months later. By then, she thought she had everything lined up. She'd spoken to her lawyer, had documentation of our financial imbalance, and assumed she'd walk away with the house, a healthy chunk of my father's company, and probably alimony. She didn't expect the evidence I had. My lawyer, old school guy named Branson, laid it out in court. Every lie, every financial transfer, the infidelity, the manipulation, the attempt at fraud. It crushed her case. She left the courtroom pale-faced and empty-handed. No house, no business shares, just a small settlement my lawyer insisted I agree to expedite the process and avoid a prolonged legal circus. She tried to appeal. She lost. I moved on quietly. I didn't go on social media, didn't tell friends or coworkers the full story. I just buried myself in work and focused on restoring the Skidaway mansion. But I kept one eye open. And then, 2 years ago, I saw a listing. A mansion in Charleston. Once belonged to Tobias Shaw. He and Alina had apparently gotten married a year after our divorce. They tried to live big, expensive cars, luxury vacations, social clubs. But Tobias had no real money. It was all borrowed time. When his investments collapsed, they defaulted on the mortgage. The house went into foreclosure. And I bought it. Under a holding company. Quietly. Cleanly. No need for her to know. The moment I closed on the property, I got the notice. Previous owners would be evicted within 30 days. I didn't go watch. I didn't need to. A friend who still lived in the area sent me a photo. Alina, standing on the marble front steps, boxes at her feet, the same expensive coat I once bought her draped over her arm. She looked smaller than I remembered. After I bought that mansion, I didn't step foot inside right away. There was something ceremonial about it, I guess. A part of me needed to let the dust settle. Emotionally, not just literally. It had been a symbolic move more than anything else. To reclaim the place she thought was going to be her fresh start, the setting for her new status life. It had felt like closure, or maybe just a long-awaited checkmate in a game I never signed up to play. But still, even after the papers were signed and she was out, I waited. When I finally did go, it was quiet. Almost eerily so. The house sat on a quiet street just north of Charleston proper, tucked behind old pines and wisteria that had started creeping up the iron gates. It was grand, sure, but not warm. The bones of the place were good, but the insides? Gaudy. Too much white and glass and gold. Cold lighting. Abstract furniture that made it feel more like a luxury Airbnb than a home. It struck me as fitting. I walked through slowly, room by room, touching the railings, the countertops, half expecting to find some forgotten artifact of her life. Her perfume, maybe. A photograph she missed. But there was nothing. Just the sterile, leftover aura of people pretending to be happy. In one of the upstairs bathrooms, a drawer in the vanity was stuck. I forced it open and found it. An old folded note. Just a single piece of yellow-lined paper, folded neatly but left behind like it wasn't important. It was a grocery list, scrawled in her handwriting. It wasn't anything personal. Just eggs, milk, champagne, raspberries, a reminder to book a spa day. But seeing her handwriting again, for whatever reason, made me sit on the edge of the tub and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 3 years. Even now, after everything, I didn't hate her. I was angry. Resentful, sure. But hate? No. I think I pitted her more than anything. Back in Savannah, things were quiet. Life had found its rhythm again. My work had changed since the divorce. I no longer just restored properties for profit. I'd shifted my focus to projects that mattered to me. Historical homes, veteran housing, rebuilding homes in neglected neighborhoods. It was my way of honoring my father. He always believed wealth meant little if it didn't build something lasting. I kept the Skidaway house. That place became my sanctuary. There was something about that estate, restored with so much intention and care by my father, that felt alive. Like it breathed a little easier when I walked through it. Some mornings I'd sit out on the second-story veranda, coffee in hand, and imagine him sitting there decades before me, sketching floor plans on a notepad, picturing something greater than himself. Word got around about Alina's situation. Savannah's not a small town in that way. People talk. Turns out, she and Tobias didn't make it past the fallout. Once the house was lost and the money dried up, so did the marriage. She tried her hand at starting over again. Moved to Atlanta, briefly worked in luxury real estate, then bounced between a couple of temp jobs. Last I heard, she was living in a one-bedroom apartment off Buford Highway. I never reached out. But once, maybe a year after I bought the house, I got an email. From her. No subject line. Just a few sentences. I know you probably hate me. I don't expect a reply. Just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I hope you're well. You were better than I deserved. I read it once and closed the tab. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't have anything else to say. She had her version of the story. I had mine. And replying would have only invited something back into my life that no longer had a place. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet. Something I haven't really told anyone. About a year before the divorce, Alina had tried to get pregnant. I didn't think much of it at the time. She said she was ready for the next step, We weren't fighting yet. Things were strained, but manageable. We'd even started looking at bigger houses. She went off birth control, charted everything, bought all the trackers and supplements. But it never happened. At the time, I was disappointed, confused. I thought maybe something was wrong with me. I got tested. Everything came back normal. I asked her if she wanted to try IVF, but she brushed it off. Said, maybe it's not the right time. I didn't question it. Years later, after everything came out, I revisited that part. I started to wonder, was it real? Was she actually trying? Or was that just part of the performance? A way to further tie herself into my future? And worse, did she stop trying once she realized the inheritance wasn't what she expected? I'll never know. But that's the part that stuck with me. Not the lies. Not the money. The idea that she may have pretended to want a family just to make herself harder to leave. These days, I don't talk about her. Not with friends. Not with new women I date. Not because I'm hiding anything, but because it's not who I am anymore. That version of Caleb, the one who thought love meant never asking questions, never doubting anything, is long gone. I've learned a lot since then. That people can wear love like a mask. That manipulation doesn't always come with red flags or raised voices. Sometimes it comes with soft smiles and the words you've been waiting your whole life to hear. I've also learned that patience is a kind of power. That silence isn't always weakness. That walking away doesn't make you a coward. It makes you someone who survived. There were whispers from mutual contacts. People who used to be her friends, but never really picked a side after the divorce. A couple of them reached out after her life took a nosedive, mostly fishing for info. I stayed polite, vague, and kept it moving. I'd had enough of playing the polite fool to last a lifetime. But someone must have told her I'd been in Charleston recently. Maybe someone mentioned that I'd bought property there. I don't know. One day, I got another email. This one longer. She didn't beg, didn't accuse, but the tone had shifted from regretful to curious. I've heard some things. Did you buy the house? Tobias never told me who took it. If it was you, I suppose that would be fair. I guess I just want to understand why. I didn't answer, because she already knew why. I didn't buy the house to hurt her. Not really. I bought it because it was symbolic. A full circle moment. That house represented everything she thought she was climbing toward when she left me. A throne she believed was waiting for her the moment she shed her mask and showed her true face. Turns out, it was just a fancy box with a leaky foundation. I had the house gutted. Every surface redone. That gaudy, sterile design she loved? Gone. I brought in local artisans, woodworkers, and craftsmen to rebuild it in the style of the old southern homes I grew up around. It took a year and a half, and every inch of it became a reflection of something real. No more glass coffee tables and gold fixtures. We used reclaimed wood from a demolished inn in Beaufort. The chandelier in the entryway came from a salvage yard in Savannah, where my dad once bought an antique banister. I never moved in. Instead, I turned it into a retreat for artists and writers. People who needed quiet. People rebuilding, rediscovering, or just trying to get something out of their soul and into the world. They don't know the story behind the house. I never told them. They just see a place with soft light, long shadows, and the kind of stillness that lets people think deeply. I go there sometimes, just to walk the halls. Not to gloat or relive the past, but to remind myself how far I've come. There was one night, a cold February evening, where I stayed over at the house alone. One of the guests had canceled last minute, and I'd just gotten back from a speaking engagement in New Orleans. I figured I'd take the opportunity to spend a quiet night there before heading back to Savannah. I brought a book and a bottle of rye whiskey I'd been saving. At around midnight, I found myself sitting by the fireplace in the study, watching embers fade, and thinking about the version of me that had once stood by a screen door, listening to his wife laugh at him from just a few feet away. I could still hear her voice, clear as day. Too stupid to notice. It wasn't even the cruelty of the words that got to me. It was how easily they came. Like she wasn't even angry, just indifferent. That was the real wound. Realizing you were a prop in someone else's story. A means to an end. I poured another drink and stared into the fire, thinking about my dad. He'd warned me in his own way. Not with lectures or ultimatums. Just subtle reminders to keep my eyes open. And I hadn't. Not until it was almost too late. But even in that, I was lucky. Because I did see it. And I acted. Maybe not in anger. Maybe not with loud confrontation, but with purpose. And I knew my father would have approved of that. A few months later, I ran into someone who used to work at Alina's old law firm. A junior partner named Claire, if I remember right. She was at a fundraising event in Hilton Head for historical preservation, and we ended up seated at the same table. She didn't bring up Alina at first. We talked about old homes, restoration grants, shared stories of impossible contractors, and inflated lumber prices. But eventually, somewhere between dessert and coffee, she said, I heard what happened. About the divorce. About the house. I gave a small nod. Nothing more. Then she added, quietly, she talks about you, sometimes. When she drinks. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't want to know. But Claire went on anyway. She always says the same thing. That she underestimated you. I didn't say anything. just folded my napkin and thanked her for the evening. The funny thing is, that's the part one agree with the most. She did underestimate me. She mistook my silence for stupidity, my trust for gullibility, my love for weakness. But all that time, I was learning, watching, becoming the man I should have been from the start. I didn't date seriously for a while after the divorce. I went on a few half-hearted coffee dates, had some good conversations that didn't go anywhere, and even got talked into a blind date or two by well-meaning friends. But nothing stuck. Partly because I didn't know how to trust again. Partly because I wasn't sure who I was without her shadow still hanging over the recent past. But I didn't rush it. I focused on rebuilding not just homes, but myself. Funny how grief and betrayal force you to meet yourself all over again. Strip away the roles, the expectations, the compromises you made for someone else, and you're left with just you. And for a while, I didn't know what to do with that. But gradually, I figured it out. I started taking road trips again, picked up woodworking, volunteered with a group that restored old cemeteries across the South. And in those quiet moments, nail gun in hand, boots in the mud, sweat dripping under the Savannah sun, I remembered what it felt like to be proud of something. To build something with my own two hands. Not just for her, not for legacy, for me. And even now, with all of it in the rearview mirror, it still lingers in small ways. I check people's words more closely. I listen longer before I speak. I guard my peace the way my dad guarded his blueprints. Precious, personal, and not for just anyone's eyes. But I'm not bitter. It's strange how something that once consumed your every waking moment can slowly fade into background noise. Not disappear, just quiet down. Like a hum you don't notice until it stops. That's what life became. Not empty, not dull, just quieter. And in the stillness, I found a rhythm. I threw myself into projects. Not just work, real passion efforts. Restoring the kinds of homes that most developers wouldn't touch. The kind buried under decades of rot and bureaucracy. Old post-bellum farmhouses, crumbling shotgun houses in neglected quarters, Civil War-era structures swallowed up by vines and silence. I worked with community leaders. Started offering restoration jobs to ex-cons and veterans trying to reintegrate. We trained them in carpentry, masonry, roofing, plumbing. We built more than houses. We built confidence, community. And I realized something in the process. Purpose didn't need to come with applause. It just needed to matter. My dad would have loved it. He was never a man for trophies. His pride lived in quiet corners, plaster finished right, a window sealed against the storm, a family moving into something that would last. And without ever saying it, he passed that into me. I think that's what helped me heal more than anything. Replacing the hollow noise of heartbreak with the tactile satisfaction of creation. One brick at a time. But healing doesn't mean forgetting. One afternoon, while on site at a 2-story Greek revival house outside Macon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I don't usually answer unknown numbers, but something made me pick up. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. "Caleb," a voice asked after a pause. I knew it immediately, not because of the tone, but because of the silence that followed it. That little breath people take when they know they shouldn't be calling. It was Alina. She didn't sound smug. She didn't sound sad either. Just tired. As if she'd rehearsed this call in her mind 1,000 times and now couldn't remember the lines. I didn't say anything. Let her sit in it. "I didn't mean for it to go the way it did," she finally said. "I know I messed up. I know I was selfish. She stopped. I heard a car horn in the background. Muffled city sounds. Maybe Atlanta. Maybe somewhere else. I guess I called because I don't know who else would even care enough to answer. That was the part that hit me. Not because I cared, but because I once did. Deeply. Enough to burn for it. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't anything. I was just done. Still, I said, "What is it you want, Alina?" Another silence. "Nothing," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I do think about what I did. And I do wonder what life would have been like if I'd actually appreciated what I had." I didn't tell her what I was doing. Didn't mention the homes, the company, the mansion, the lives rebuilt. I didn't tell her about the evenings spent reading on porches I'd restored, the sound of laughter from families moving into places they thought they'd never afford. I didn't need to. "Take care of yourself," I said, and hung up. That phone call stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Not because of her, but because of how indifferent I felt. That used to be a woman whose absence would have hollowed me out. A single tear from her could have broken me. Now, all it gave me was a brief hiccup in my afternoon. And in a way, that felt like winning. Months passed. I started dating again. Not just casually, but intentionally. I met someone through work, actually. Delia. She was a preservationist from Tennessee, sharp as a tack, and with a kind of dry wit that caught me off guard every time. She didn't care about money. Didn't even know my last name at first, which was oddly refreshing. We met over lunch to discuss a funding proposal and ended up closing the place down just talking about old towns, books we loved, and the strangest things we'd ever pulled out of a crawl space. Her story involved a taxidermied raccoon holding a playing card. Mine was a porcelain doll sealed in a cinder block. She didn't ask personal questions. Didn't pry. Let things unfold at a pace I could actually breathe in. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking for warning signs. I was just present. I didn't tell her about Alina. Not at first. But one night, over dinner at a small spot in Tybee Island, she asked, "Why do you always seem like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop?" I hadn't even realized I was doing it. That subconscious tension. That quiet vigilance. So I told her. Not all the details. Not yet. But enough. And when I finished, she didn't pity me. Didn't flinch. Just reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, "Yeah, I've been there. Different version. Same feeling." Turns out, she had a past too. Not with someone like Alina, but with someone who drained her in other ways. A partner who made her feel small. Someone who used silence as punishment. Control disguised as concern. We both rebuilt from rubble. In different ways, but with the same stubborn fire. That night, I realized something. There's nothing more grounding than being seen by someone who's had to stitch themselves back together too. Alina reached out one last time. This time by mail. A plain envelope. No return address. Just my name, handwritten. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, front and back. Apology, reflection, regret. She admitted everything. Not just the inheritance motive, but how deep it went. The manipulation. The way she shaped herself into whatever she thought I needed, while quietly resenting me for never seeing the truth. She also admitted that she did, in her own twisted way, care about me. Not at first, but eventually. And by the time she realized it, she said it was too late. The letter ended with this: "I don't expect forgiveness, but I do hope that in some way, you found something better than what I could have ever given you. Something real. Something earned. You deserve that much." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I'd already said it. With every day lived without her. With every broken thing I helped fix. With every person I offered a second chance to. Not because I owed it, but because I understood what it meant to fall and get back up. That was the reply. It wasn't until a year after the letter that the last piece of the story came together. I was back in Charleston for a preservation conference, an annual thing where historians, developers, and community planners gather to share research, raise funding, and sometimes squabble over zoning rights like it's the Civil War all over again. It's where you see all the faces in the world of restoration. Familiar ones, new ones, even old ghosts. Which is exactly what happened. I was standing near the back of the exhibit hall, talking with a woman from the Georgia Trust about some grant allocations, when I saw her. Alina. I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked bad, she didn't, but because she no longer had that air about her. That edge. The performative poise. She looked normal. Grounded. A little older, of course, but quieter in her presence. She was working at a modest restoration nonprofit. I found that out through a conversation later with one of the event organizers. Apparently, she'd gone back to school for her preservation license and had been doing small-scale project work. Nothing headline-worthy, but steady. And here's the thing that struck me. I didn't feel anger. Not even that tight discomfort that used to sneak up when her name was mentioned. I just felt complete. Like the last page of a book you didn't know needed a final paragraph. I didn't approach her. Didn't need to. Because my revenge had never been about confrontation. It was about living better. And by every metric, I had. A few months later, I got a call from the city council in Charleston. They were looking for an advisory consultant on a large-scale preservation project, a historic district redevelopment. They'd received several proposals. One of them came from the nonprofit Alina now worked for. The twist? The final say would come down to a recommendation from my office. It wasn't a massive deal. It was a mid-sized contract. But still, symbolically, it mattered. I met with the review board. We looked through the proposals. Hers wasn't the best. Wasn't the worst, either. But what set the top proposal apart was experience, stability, and long-term sustainability. 3 things she hadn't quite built yet. So I did the professional thing. I voted in favor of the stronger proposal. With full transparency. No bias. No backroom whispering. I gave my reasons in writing, based strictly on merit and mission alignment. The final vote was unanimous. Her firm lost the bid. Weeks later, I heard from a mutual colleague that she'd been frustrated, said it would have been their biggest opportunity yet, that she'd worked hard for it, that she'd almost made it. And that, right there, was my quiet revenge. No yelling. No retribution. Just a man who stayed the course, kept his integrity, and let the wheel of consequence turn naturally. A year after that, I married Delia. We had a small wedding on the Skidaway estate. Just family, a few friends, and a canopy of moss-covered oaks swaying above us. It was nothing like my first wedding. No performance. No pretending. Just 2 people who knew each other's scars and still chose to show up. At one point, during the reception, I stepped away from the music and stood on the veranda. The same spot where I used to sit alone with my father's bourbon, trying to piece together how everything had gone so wrong. But this time, I wasn't alone. Delia joined me, barefoot, holding her shoes in one hand and 2 glasses of sweet tea in the other. Thinking, she asked. Always, I said. About her. I looked out at the marsh, where the water glimmered under a golden sunset. No, I said truthfully. Not anymore. And that was it. The revenge wasn't in ruining her life. It was in refusing to let her ruin mine. It was in building something stronger from the rubble she left behind. It was in becoming the man my father knew I could be. And when I stood in that house she tried to take from me, when I signed the documents she'd once schemed to forge, when I laughed in a room filled with love instead of manipulation, that's when I knew. I'd already won.